Katie here. We are officially in a new decade, for better or for worse. We won't know for another 10 years, but I hope to God it is better than the last one. So one of the things that I really want to do in 2020 is to properly get back to BookTube. I had such a strong start with BookTube, and that first year that I did it, in fact the first 2 years, I was really on top of my game, but then everything went downhill because life got in the way and I just completely lost all motivation. But I would really like to get back to BookTube in 2020. So we are starting the year with a video! This decade has been such an emotional roller coaster for me. The first half of it started really well. I went to university, I graduated university, and then everything kind of just went downhill after that. My problems with anxiety really reached a new level after university. Anxiety is something that I've always struggled with, but it really got to me after I graduated. I kind of just felt lost and like I didn't know where I was going, and I still don't. But from the midpoint of the decade, things went to shit. And it made life very difficult because it does that. It sucks. The whole reason why I started BookTube was because of my anxiety. A fear that I had was speaking in front of the camera. And because I couldn't control any other aspect of it, I wanted to control that one thing. I felt like I needed to achieve something. So I worked really hard in making myself comfortable with filming videos. And although I still have no confidence, I hate the way I look on camera, I hate the way I sound on camera, editing is a nightmare because I hate watching things back, I still managed to get to a point where I can film videos and I can upload them to the internet. So I overcame one thing, and even when anxiety is stopping me from going to appointments, from making phone calls, from doing things that I should be able to do, at least I can say that I was able to overcome one part of it. So yeah, the decade kind of screwed me over a little bit, but despite everything that has happened, the one thing that has always been constant for me in this decade is books. Some of my happiest memories from the past 10 years are down to books. They've been there for me in my darkest moments, to remind me why I love them so much. So I didn't want to enter a new decade without acknowledging the books from the last decade that have helped shape me into the person that I am today. There are 10 books in this list and I was going to number them, but I've decided not to because it's impossible to rank them. Every single one of them has played a part in me. So let's jump right in and take a look back at some of the books that have quite literally changed my life. The first one, and I literally wouldn't be able to make this list without it, is the Mediator series by Meg Cabot. Aside from Harry Potter, this is the series that contributed most into me reading the way I do. Harry Potter was the series that got me into reading in general, but the Mediator was the series that brought me into YA, and that is the genre that I've stuck with, and I know I will stick with, no matter how old I am. Yes, I'm gonna be that person in my 50s still reading YA, because YA is so unafraid. YA stories deal with stuff that so many other genres don't. So yeah, I'm gonna be reading YA no matter what, but this was the series that dragged me in. Even though I'd read Meg Cabot's books before this decade, it was in 2010 that I picked up the Mediator series. It instantly became my favourite series other than Harry Potter. And part of me knows that if I read it again now, I probably wouldn't like it as much as I did 10 years ago, but nothing can take away the love that I had for it back then. I was just obsessed with these books, and it was because of this series that I wanted to check out more YA. After finishing this series, I just wanted more things to read that could draw me in as much as these books did. And that's how I fell down the YA rabbit hole. And I'm still here! So the next book is Between Shades of Grey by Ruta Sepetys. The reason why this book is on my list is because I definitely wouldn't be doing this without this book. This was the book that made me start my book blog. For those of you who don't know, I do have a book blog that I've had since 2011. That was where I started discussing books online, and eventually that's how I ended up in the booktube community as well. It all started with my blog. And the blog started because of this book. So at the very start of the decade, I didn't have any friends who were readers. I was always forcing my mum and my sister into reading the same books that I was reading so that I could talk to somebody about those books. I mean, they thank me for it now, especially my sister, because I turned her into the reader that she is today. You're welcome. But that's what I did at the time because I didn't have anyone else. I also didn't have internet at home full time until 2010. We had it for a little bit when I was a lot younger, but then because of the money troubles that we were having, internet just wasn't a priority for us, and we didn't get it back until I was leaving college and going to university. So I didn't have the online book community that I have now either. I didn't even know that that was a thing. So when I first got the internet back into my life, that's when I took my first steps into the online book community. And that's also how I applied to be a reviewer in a teen magazine. It was called Bliss, and it used to be huge over here in the UK, and I would read it every month. And they had a section at the back where people could apply to review books for them, which I did. So I applied via their website and they sent me this. And you know what? At first I was disappointed because it was a war book and I didn't want a war book. I wanted one of the exciting fantasy series that they were giving to everyone else. Despite the fact that I loved history, I didn't really want to read fiction books about history. But then I read this book and oh my god. I was reading it on the train to uni and I got to like a really dark part. I mean, there's a lot of really dark parts in this book. It's about war, but there was just this one part and I knew I was gonna cry and I had to quickly put the book away because I didn't want a whole packed train seeing me in tears. And it was because of my love for this book that I really wanted to start talking to other readers, and because I had no other way of doing that, I ended up starting my blog, and through that I found my way to Goodreads. I converted my Twitter into a book Twitter account because originally it was my actual Twitter account, so God knows what was on there before I started talking about books. But this was the book that brought me into the online book community. So that's why it is still so very important to me to this day. So the third book we all knew was going to be here at some point. And it is The Hunger Games by Suzanne Collins. This series, my first journey into dystopia, this book changed so much for me because until this book, I was very much a reader of contemporary and then low-key fantasy. And I didn't really go anywhere else. This opened up a whole new world for me. My journey to discovering The Hunger Games was a little bit odd. If any of you watched my Six of Crows casting video, then you will know that I loved Ben Barnes when I was a teenager because of Narnia. I loved Narnia very much when I was younger, and so did my little sister. Whilst I was the Ben Barnes fan in the house, my sister was in love with the actor that played Peter Pevensey. So when it was announced there was going to be a film of The Hunger Games, he was a blonde actor. So he made his way into people's fan casts. That is my dog. He's getting excited because he's going for walkies. He made his way... We're just gonna have to wait until he leaves the house. He made his way into people's fan casts and fan edits when it came down to Peter Malark. Anyone who was a young blonde man at that time was probably Peter Malark at some point. It's just the way it was. So my sister, who was completely in love with him, asked me if I'd ever read The Hunger Games, and at the time I hadn't, because like I said, I was wrapped up in my little contemporary bubble. I didn't read books like this. I told her that I hadn't, but then I searched it up for myself, and the sound of it just, it didn't sound for me. Children killing each other? No thank you. So that didn't get me interested. But then a week later, I was in my local library and I couldn't find anything that I wanted to read. But this was there on the shelf and I remembered talking about it with my sister and I just thought, you know what? Why not? I'll give it a try. I'll give it a go. And then yeah, it changed everything for me. I stopped reading contemporary after this because I just went in search of dystopia and then fantasy, and then yeah, it just kick-started my love for different genres, basically. I went hardcore into the Hunger Games fandom. I was there through every single bit of the casting process. The emotions I have that are connected to this series, nothing can take that away from me. I'm always going to love this book. So the fourth book, well, series, because most of these are series, will not come as a surprise to absolutely anyone who is subscribed to this channel, because of course it's the Mortal Instruments. Who am I if not connected to the Mortal Instruments? My relationship with Shadowhunter books and Cassandra Clare in general has changed a lot over the decade. But that's a discussion for another time. Right now I just want to talk about how much I appreciate the Mortal Instruments. I wouldn't be the person that I am today without them. I really wouldn't. This was the first series that I picked up after I finished The Hunger Games, because once I'd finished that, I wanted to start reading the other big YA series that people were talking about at the time. So I picked up the Mortal Instruments in 2011. Yeah, the rest is history. We know where it went from there for me. I've been here through the film adaptation. I stayed throughout Shadowhunters. I have continued to read series after series after series, despite thinking that City of Heavenly Fire would be the end for these characters. It has played a huge part in my life. This is my first copy of the book. It's my first signed copy from when my sister and I went to go and meet Cassandra Clare in 2012, which was my first ever book signing. We got the book signed to both of us because we couldn't afford another copy at the time. So me and my sister will have joint custody of this book for the rest of our lives. We then met her again in 2013 when she came back to London with Jamie Campbell-Bower, who played Jace in City of Bones. And no matter what happened with regards to that film, I am so grateful I got to go to that book signing, because I'd actually been a fan of Jamie since before he was cast as Jace. I was one of the people who was tweeting for him to play Jace, and then it actually happened. And you know, I thought it was going to be the best thing ever, but I was very, very wrong. But let's not talk about that. I don't want to be sad. I want to be happy that I got to experience that. I went to the launch party for City of Heavenly Fire in London. They made us all watch the movie, which it was kind of awkward, because at that point we knew that the films didn't have a future, but we were just like, okay. So, you know, I've been through it with this series, and no matter what happens, I'm always going to love these characters dearly, and I have such fun memories of reading these books. It was a huge part of my journey into book fandom and into Tumblr. I've actually made friends because of this. I mean, it was more because of Shadowhunters, but Shadowhunters wouldn't exist if it wasn't for this. One of my best friends started talking to me because of Shadowhunters. So yeah, I had no idea when I picked this book up from the library, because I wanted something to help me get over the Hunger Games, that it was going to lead down the path that it did. The fifth book is The Hate You Give by Angie Thomas. I cannot tell you how important this book is. If you haven't read it, then you need to. We've seen a lot of ignorance from white people, especially people who still think that their opinion is above other people's, despite not fully understanding situations because they're not actually experiencing it. When it comes to movements like Black Lives Matter, our job is to support. It's not to overspeak and overshadow the people who are actually experiencing these horrible, atrocious things. And I know that this book made people think a lot differently about what they say, because this book highlights not only the really dangerous things that are happening when it comes to the police, especially in America, but also the everyday ignorance of people. There are characters in this that make awful comments and genuinely don't realise how terrible those comments are and how much they hurt people. There is just so much within this book that needed to be said. And I genuinely do think it is one of the most important YA books that we've had this decade. It also showed me how much we need to support non-white authors as well, because every literary community is overrun by a certain type of writer, and we just need more. We need more stories like this, and we need more authors like Angie. We need publishers to support them, and we need readers to pick up their books and support them as well. And since this book was published, I've seen so many bloggers and booktubers make videos recommending more diverse stories and make lists of authors that you should read. It would be impossible for me to make this list without putting this book on it. Next up is a book that I've mentioned quite a few times on this channel, and it is Fangirl by Rainbow Rowell. The love I have in my heart for this book. I am going to put it down while I talk though, because it is a big hardback and I'm lazy. There's always characters in YA that are going through things that you're going through, and you feel their emotions, and you know, you're like, yeah, that's me. I understand what this character is saying. But nothing has ever connected with me as much as Fangirl did. That was on a whole different level. I felt what Kath was going through. I'm not saying that my experiences are exactly the same as hers, because they're not by a long shot, but it was the first time that I read a main character who had anxiety that felt so much like my own anxiety. Just Kath in general, in the fears that she has and in the life that she leads as well, taking comfort in fandom and so on, that was just me. I was exactly the same. The only difference is that I didn't have a Levi. I still don't have a Levi. I don't think I'm ever going to have a Levi. But Fangirl just meant so much to me. Seeing a character going through the same sort of emotions and anxieties that I was. It was the first book by Rainbow Rowell that I read. She came to Liverpool to do a book signing for Fangirl, and I was able to go to that and tell her how much that book meant to me. So Fangirl will always mean a lot to me. And of course it led to Carry On, which we'll get to later. So the next book is less about the book and more about the author in general, but it is Morris by E.M. Forster. This was the decade that I fell in love with a classic author. So my relationship with classics is a very rocky one, because when I was in high school and I was forced to read classics, I absolutely hated them. So when I left school, I wanted nothing to do with them. It just reminded me of the stress of school. So I left classics behind when I left school, and I didn't voluntarily go back to them until E.M. Forster. I read A Room with a View in about 2015, and I completely fell in love with it. And you know, I had tried classics before. I had tried the likes of Jane Austen, and I just didn't really enjoy any of it. But A Room with a View, I don't know why, I just loved it so much. And then I found my way to Morris. I was specifically looking for classics that had LGBT themes, because at the time I was reading a lot of modern stories that had those topics in it, and I became more interested in writing and compiling lists for my blog to share those books with other people, because we need to read diverse stories and I'm always yelling about it online. So I was looking for historical novels with those themes, and I came across Morris, and because I'd already read A Room with a View, I decided to give this one a read. Completely fell in love with this book. I completely fell in love with E.M. Forster. He's dead, but I'd die for that man. I would die for him. This book brought out emotions I didn't even know I had. I actually cried more at the author's note at the end than I did at the actual story, because it's about Forster knowing that this type of story couldn't have been published back when he was younger and publishing his novels, and it just breaks my heart that he never got to see this become what it is today. He didn't get to see it published. So reading his notes on that story and why it was important to him to make sure that these two gay characters got what at the time would have been a happy ending for them. I mean, not necessarily happy, but what would have been the best outcome for them. He was determined not to kill one of them at the end, make it a tragedy, stick to what would have been realistic for two gay men at that time. He didn't want to write it like that. He wrote them having their idea of a happy ending, and it's because of that that the book couldn't have been published at the time. I applaud him so much for that book. It's now a book that I throw at absolutely everyone. I've thrown it at my whole family. My sister ended up writing an essay on that book because of my influence. But also, it was Forster that opened me up to classics again, and now I am reading other classic authors and enjoying them. So it was probably just a matter of timing. Who I was at the start of the decade is not who I am now. So obviously my taste changed, and it could have been any classic author that dragged me back in, but it was Forster. And yeah, I'll continue to spread the Forster agenda for the rest of my life. So I have 3 books left. If you've watched any of my videos, you can probably predict what the next 3 books are. One of them is The Raven Boys by Maggie Stiefvater. It's the Raven cycle in general. Words aren't enough for how much I love this series. They're really not. When I say the books were there for me in some of my darkest times, this was one of the series that I read when I was at a pretty low in my life. It was in 2016. My family was going through a lot of struggles at that point. I was having panic attacks quite often. At the very start of the year, I just felt so down. I was just looking for something to take my mind off everything. So I delved back into Book Tumblr, because in 2015 I kind of just went away from it for a while. But I went back in 2016 and looked for some recommendations. Everyone was reading 2 series at the time. One was this, one was the next book that I'm going to talk about, but I had quite a few mutuals at the time that told me to read this. I had tried Maggie's previous series, the first one that she did. I didn't like it, didn't go back to it, so when she released The Raven Cycle I didn't really go near it either. And also I'd seen a lot of hype for Shiver and those books, but I hadn't really seen many people talking about this on Twitter, which was where I was mostly involved in the book community at that time, which is why I didn't really see it until I started getting back into Tumblr. So I went down to my library and picked up the first book. 2 days later I went back to the library and picked up the other 2 books that were out at the time. I got through them all in a week. It just completely fell in love with these books. I think in part it was due to the fact that it didn't really focus that much on romance. Blue and Gansey were not in your face. We didn't know whether Pinch was actually going to be a thing. It just focused more on building the characters and the story in general. I just absolutely fell in love with it, and I couldn't believe I had gone that long without reading these books. So then after I finished those 3, I only had a couple of months to wait until The Raven King came out. I'm just so sad that I didn't get to be in the fandom for longer. I just wish I'd picked this up when it came out, but I never gave it a chance because I didn't think that I was going to like it, especially by the blurb, because the blurb for this is just so typical YA fantasy love story. And that's probably why I just didn't want to go near it, because I thought it was going to be another one of those books. And it was nothing like that. I love these characters so much. I met Maggie in 2016. It took every ounce of my being not to break down crying in front of her, because, like, she reignited my love for stories and for YA fantasy in general, because I was in a bit of a slump before I found these books. I love them, and, you know, Ronan Lynch is always going to be one of my absolute favourite fictional characters of all time. So the next series, despite being completely different to The Raven Cycle, they kind of go hand in hand. And it is the All for the Game series by Nora Sakavic. The Foxhole Court changed me as a person. I don't even have words. So if you don't know The Foxhole Court, it is a self-published trilogy of books. And I think you can still download them for free on Amazon. I'm pretty sure you can. But they are completely self-published, which is why a lot of people don't get to hear about them, which is devastating and is something that I'm always trying to change. If you have no idea what they're about, they are very dark books, which is probably why they don't have a publisher, because, you know, it deals with things that a lot of big publishing houses don't think would appeal to readers, despite the fact that it's still very important content. So it is very dark, but I had never heard of these books until 2016, when I started getting back into Book Tumblr, and the mutuals that were recommending The Raven Cycle to me were also recommending these books, and I had no idea what they were. I had one mutual who was trying to tell me it was about a fictional sport and the mafia, and I was just sitting there like, what? And And the only reason I downloaded it was because it was free on Amazon and because my mutual was relentless. I don't speak to this mutual anymore either, and that makes me very sad because she has no idea how much she changed my life by making me read this book. The characters in these books, I don't have enough time now to talk about why I love these books, but I am determined this year to reread all 3 of them, properly make notes, and then make a video on them because I've been wanting to do this since I started BookTube. But for now, just know that I love them dearly, despite how much they hurt me, which they did a lot. And those 2 series completely defined 2016. They helped me get out of a major reading slump. They helped me go in search of other books. And I got back involved with an online book community. And that was really important to me at that time because 2016 was a difficult year. It would have been so much worse without those books. They meant everything to me in that year because I felt very alone at the start of it. I was heavily involved in book Twitter, but then I noticed how cliquey it had gotten, and I got involved in like group chats and group communities and a book club, and then it kind of just left me feeling bad about myself because I ended up being that one person who'd speak up and everybody would ignore. It left me not wanting to blog as much, and I wasn't going on Twitter, I wasn't talking about books. And then when I went back to Tumblr and I found these books and I had people who wanted to talk to me about them, it helped me feel involved again. So I feel like I owe a lot to those 2 series because they changed things for me. Now on to the final book. There are so many other books this decade that have been massively important to me, but obviously this video is long enough as it is. I haven't got time for everything, so we are wrapping it up with one more book. I think we already probably know what it is, but despite the fact that The Raven Cycle and All for the Game was so important to me and really shaped me into the reader that I am today, I don't think I would have picked up those series if it hadn't have been for this book. This book was a moment in my life. And it is Carry On by Rainbow Rowell. Big surprise. Who expected this book to be on this list? It's not like I haven't shut up about this story for the past 5 years. I am relentless. I really am. I don't think I will rest until everyone I come in contact with reads Carry On. If you watched my review of Wayward Son, then I spoke a little bit in that about how my relationship with Carry On was a little bit touch and go because I didn't think that I was going to like it, and in the run up to it I wasn't that invested, but then I read it and it completely changed everything. Like I said, I'm not ranking the books, but out of everything I do think that this is the book that has defined my decade the most. Not just because I love the story and the characters so much, but because I think it changed what I look for in a story. It was after this book that I went in search of more fantasy that had characters who weren't straight. It's in part why when people were recommending The Raven Cycle and The Foxhole Court to me, I went towards them because people were talking about how diverse they were, and after reading Carry On, that is what I wanted. I didn't want the stereotypical YA characters that I was always reading about. I didn't want that same love story over and over again. A typical white female who's torn between 2 basic white males. I was tired. I was so tired of that. And Carry On came along at the right moment in my life because it showed me why I was tired of those cliches. It just broke rules. It really did. And it came about in the most ridiculously brilliant way. It was fanfiction in Fangirl that was high-key based on Harry Potter. That's what Simon Snow is to Kath in Fangirl. It's what Harry Potter is to us. But you put all of those ridiculous ideas together and you get this book. I don't have words. I mean, I do, I have a lot of words, I never shut up. But I can't possibly describe how much I love this book and how much it means to me. So yeah, they were 10 of the books that have been super important to me over the past 10 years. But there are so many others. But like I said, we'd be here all day. So thank you guys for watching this probably horribly long video about the books that have defined my decade. Please do let me know what books have been important to you over the past 10 years. What books are you looking for in the next decade? What do you think you're going to read more of? Please let me know all of your thoughts down in the comments. Thank you guys so much for watching. Bye!